Hello and welcome to Module 5 of the speaking course. My name is Chris Pell, of course, and I'll be taking you through this module. And in this module, we're going to look at everything you need to know about Part 3. So in this module, we're going to look at the format of Part 3. We're going to look at why most people don't do very well in this part and how to overcome these problems. We're going to look at the 7 most common types of questions. Now, this isn't topics, this is types of questions. So we're going to look at these. These are very, very important in order to do well in this part. And we're also going to look at how to fully develop and structure your answers. And then finally, we're going to look at how you can prepare for this part. Okay, so in the last module, we looked at the format of speaking part 2 and what to expect. We looked at common issues and we looked at my part 2 strategy and also how to prepare. Now, I'm sure that you've already watched this very, very important module outlining my part 2 strategy. So make sure that you understand it fully and then we can move on to this module. Okay, so what can we expect in speaking part 3? You will be asked questions relating to the same topic as part 2. So relating to means, linked to, but not exactly the same. So for example, you could be asked about the law in part 2, and that would mean that you would continue to be asked questions relating to the law, but that could mean questions about lawyers, questions about police, questions about the criminal justice system, questions about just law in general, international law, many different things that you could be asked. So don't expect it to be exactly the same, but it will be similar to the topic. And this will last about 4 to 5 minutes. So 4 to 5 minutes for part 1, and then 3 minutes in part 2, and then 4 to 5 minutes in part 3. The questions will be more abstract, i.e. they will be about ideas. They won't be about you. So in part 1, you were asked questions about you. So what do you do? What is your favorite thing? What do you think about this? In part 3, you will be asked to discuss more ideas. So an example would be, instead of saying something like, what is your favorite season, and you saying, my favorite season is summer, you would be asked a more abstract thing, like how does someone's mood change depending on the season? That's an idea that you would have to discuss, and it wouldn't be about you, it would be about the idea itself. So we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail later in this module. And this part is designed to stretch your abilities to the limit. You will get difficult questions. Expect difficult questions. So remember that your whole speaking test is being judged. You won't be judged on one bad question. So lots of people, when I ask them at the end of the test, how do you think you did? So this isn't in the real test, but in practice tests I do with people, I say, how do you think you did? Oh, I got one question wrong, so I messed it all up. I probably got a band 5. No, you didn't. Just because you get one difficult question doesn't mean that you're automatically going to get a lower score. But what part 3 is designed to do is for the examiner to really see what your level is. So they're going to be stretching your vocabulary and your grammar and your fluency and your pronunciation to its absolute limit to see what is your real level. And one way they will do that is they will ask you increasingly difficult questions. So expect these difficult questions. So what are the main reasons why people don't do so well? What are the reasons why people mess this part up? So the first reason is they give short answers. So you might have remembered in the previous modules, I talked about part 1, 2 or 3 sentences is more than enough. But 2 or 3 sentences for part 3 is too short. You're going to have to really develop your answers in this part, and we're going to look at how you can do that in more detail. And also people just try to finish quickly. This is a natural human thing that people do, is when they're in a stressful situation and it's coming to an end, what they do is they just naturally, your brain wants you to finish this stressful situation. So what they do is they answer the questions really quickly, and they don't give much detail in the questions, just to try and hope that the examiner will say, well done, that's the end of the test. The examiner will just keep asking you questions. That's not the way it works. And people get stressed or upset when they get a question they don't know how to answer. So, as I've already said, you will be getting strange questions, you will be getting difficult questions, you will be getting questions that require you to really think about them in order to give a good answer. If you get a question like this, the natural response is to go and then repeat yourself and give a very short answer, and then you'll do terribly for the rest of the test. This is not the way to go. The way to go is to accept that you're going to be getting a difficult question and deal with it appropriately, and we're going to discuss how you can do that. And they do not fully understand the question. So lots of people, when I ask them a question, they answer it in a completely different way than they should, and they answer the question completely wrong. And this isn't because the person is not intelligent or they don't know anything about the question. It's because they have not understood the question. And we're going to discuss that as well. And finally, they don't think about the actual question being asked. So what they do is they hear some keyword in the question, and they just start talking generally about that keyword. They don't actually think about the sentence that has come out of the examiner's mouth and what that question is asking them to do. And we're going to also talk about that. So how to avoid these common issues? What can you do in order to mitigate all of these problems? So use my technique for extending your answers. Very, very simple. We're going to show you this in this module, how you can extend your answers and give very well developed answers. And treat this as the most important part and finish strong. Practice speaking for 15 minutes in English. Now, lots of people might go to an English class, or they might have English in work, or they might have, friends that are English speakers and they practice with them. But very few people are used to speaking for 15 minutes in a foreign language, and it's extremely tiring, mentally tiring. And when you combine that with the stress that comes with just being in an exam, your brain is not really ready to cope with this. So what you need to do is you need to get used to speaking for 15 minutes, even more, 20 minutes, 25 minutes, 30 minutes, constantly. Practice getting someone to ask you questions and speaking for this length of time. And treat this as, this is the part of the exam where I'm going to make a real difference and finish really strong. I've known students who do a good part 1, good part 2, and then they start to lag in part 3 and they don't finish strong, and it does bring their marks down a little bit. So make sure this doesn't happen to you. Expect difficult questions and answer them as best you can. Now, if you get a difficult question, you have two choices. You can go into panic mode and just go, oh, I know nothing about this. I won't be able to answer this question, and then you get really upset and you give a terrible answer. Or you can just accept, this is a difficult question. The examiner is not going to change the question. I just have to give my best answer, and that's all that I can do. I'm going to show you how to enhance your answer, how to give your best possible answer. But if you get a difficult question, just say to yourself, I have this question, it's part 3, this is what I'm expecting. There will be difficult questions, and I just answer it to the best of my ability. And in that way, you will remain calm and you will give a good answer. So ask the examiner questions if you don't understand. So this is linked to the previous point. So if you get a difficult question, you can ask the examiner questions, but you can only ask them 2 questions. And the 2 questions are, can you repeat the question, please? Or can you explain what that word means, please? So lots of people who I ask them the question, and you can see it in their eyes that they didn't understand the question, and they don't know that they can ask me to repeat the question or explain what a word means. And if you do ask the examiner these two questions, and when you don't understand a question, it gives you a little bit more time to think, and it will make sure that you answer the question properly. So let's think of an example. If I asked you the question, can you think of one law that should be universal in every country in the world? So you might say, sorry, can you explain what the word universal means? And I say, yeah, okay, sorry, that it means that that law is applied in every single country in the world. Then you would think, oh, I know what that means now, and you could start answering that question properly. And that would be a better way than just sitting there and guessing the answer. And also be aware of the 7 most common types of questions and answer accordingly. And we're going to look at this in much more detail later on in this module. But I've identified, 7 types of question that you might get asked, and we'll look at them. And if you're aware of them, then you know what the examiner is trying to do and what the examiner expects. And get used to discussing ideas, not yourself, people, or events, ideas. So there's a saying, I can't remember it exactly, I'll try and paraphrase, but it's something like simple people discuss other people, people in the middle discuss events, and great people discuss ideas, or something like that. But it's not something that people do very often. People normally gossip, talk about themselves, talk about other people, or talk about, events that happened in their lives. Very rarely do people discuss these abstract ideas. So you might want to get used to discussing ideas a bit more, especially in English. So what are the 7 most common questions? First one is opinion. Second one, evaluation. 3, talking about the future. 4, cause and effect. 5, hypothetical. 6, compare and contrast. And 7, talking about the past. Now, will you be asked other questions? Quite possibly. But most of the questions will be under these, most of the questions will come under these 7. And what this does is this gives you a very big power over the examiner, because you know what the examiner is trying to do. So if the examiner asks you a question about the future, you know that they're testing whether you can use future structures. If they ask you a hypothetical question, they know that they're trying to test whether you can use conditional structures. If they're asking you to compare things, they're seeing whether you can make a comparison. If they ask your opinion, they want to see whether you can clearly do that. So when you understand what they're doing, then that allows you to react appropriately. So opinion. What is opinion? Very simply, you will be asked what you think about something. This is probably the most common one. An example, do you think that students should use ebooks? Okay, so it's asking for your opinion, but it's asking you to your opinion on an idea. The idea that students using ebooks is a good thing or a bad thing. Okay, so normally they'll say something like, "Do you think? What do you think about this?" It'll be very obvious that they are asking for your opinion. Evaluation is slightly different. You will be asked to comment on someone else's opinion. So they'll say something like, some people think that paper books are bad for the environment. Sorry about that. Do you agree? So this is slightly different. It's not saying, do you think that paper books are bad for the environment? It's saying, other people think this. Would you agree with them? So it's slightly different, and you'd have to evaluate that opinion. You'd have to say, some people think this, some people think that, and I think this. So it's more like a discussion task 2 question in writing. Future. You'll be asked to speculate about what will happen in the future. Example, do you think people will read more books in the future? This is getting you to try to use future structures. Like, I think in the future people will, you're using the word will to show the future. I think in the future people will use more books or read more books. We don't use books, we read books. So it's just getting to see if you can use those future structures. Cause and effect. You may also be asked to discuss what has caused a certain situation and what effects this have. Kind of like a causes and solutions, or problems and solutions, or causes and effects question in task 2. You can see a trend here. They're more like task 2 writing questions than part 1, where it's just, everyday normal questions about you. And then part 2 was, you giving kind of a lecture. And then this one is more a discussion of ideas, the way, you might do in a tutorial in a university class or something like that. So example for cause: how do online retailers affect the types of books people buy? And effect: what effect does this have on the book market? So the first question is talking about the cause, and the second one it's talking about the effect. Hypothetical: you'll be asked about an unreal or imaginary situation, so something that's not quite real. So an example would be, if you were a book publisher, what genre of books do you think would be most successful? So you are probably not a book publisher. It's an unreal situation or an imaginary situation that you are a book publisher, but they want you to use conditional structures. If I were a book structure, or if I was a book publisher, I would say that thriller fiction would be the most successful, or something like that. And compare and contrast. Sorry about my performance today. I don't know what is the problem, but my brain doesn't seem to be working very well. Sorry about that, but I'll try my best, just like you should in part 3. You will be asked to compare and or contrast 2 or more things. So do you believe ebooks or paper books are more suitable for students? So they're trying to get you to use comparisons. I think ebooks are more suitable than paper books, something like that. And finally, you'll be asked about how things were in the past, or how things have changed from the past up until now. That's a useful distinction for you, because that will change the tense that you use. How has the way people purchase books changed in the last 25 years? So you would have to talk, in the last 25 years, the book market has changed significantly since people have started to buy online rather than go into traditional bookstores, something like that. Obviously you would add much more detail in that, but that's just showing you the structure that they're trying to get you to use for that one. Or they could ask you a question, 10 years ago, did you buy ebooks or paper books, or something like that. And the questions won't all be about books, by the way. This is just, I like to use the same type of question, the same topic, just to illustrate this. I think it's more effective. So grammar and functional language. So there is specific grammar and functional language for each of these types of questions. So I briefly talked about some of them, but we're going to go into far more detail. Knowing this type of grammar and functional language is key to answering this question correctly and confidently. So we've already talked about having an advantage over the examiner. So you know what the examiner wants you to do. So if they say, do you prefer ebooks or paper books? You know that they're seeing if you can use a comparison. So you might not have used comparisons yet in the test, or you might have made a slight mistake with a comparison in part 1 or something, or part 2, and they want to just test this out to see if you are capable of using it. And if you are aware of that, then you can clearly and confidently give them the comparison. For example, I think ebooks are far more are cheaper than paper books, therefore they're better, or something like that. Okay, so what is more important, I think, for at the moment, is to work on developing your answers. You need to give well-developed answers for part 3, much more than part 1. We've already mentioned this. Your answer structure will depend on the type of question you get asked, but I have developed a strategy that will enable you to answer most questions properly and ensure your answer is well developed. So what is my strategy? And before we get into this strategy, I just want to reiterate, I mentioned it briefly before, this is not suitable for every single type of question, okay? You have to answer the question specifically, and if they ask you to compare and contrast do that. If they ask you a hypothetical question, use a conditional. But this is just an overall strategy that you'll be able to use for most questions. So the first one is answer the question. Very, very simple. So if they ask you a question, answer it. And then the second thing you need to do is explain your answer. So explain why you think that. Number 3, give examples to support your answer. So much like a task 2 main body paragraph, answer the question, our topic sentence, then our explanation, and then we use an example. And then show the other side or a concession. So for every topic, for everything in life, there are 2 sides to it. So normally your answer will cover one side, and then you want to briefly mention the other side. And think of it like a task 2 writing main body paragraph. So let me give you an example. If somebody said to me, in your country, do people respect the police? Okay, so I'm going to, or do you think people respect the police in general? So that's an idea that I need to talk about. So I'm going to answer the question first. That's going to be yes or no, very, very simply. Then I'm going to explain why I think yes or no. And then I'm going to give some examples to help support my answer. And then if I said yes, I'm going to show the no side. If I said no, then I'm going to show the yes side. And once you get into the rhythm of this and you get used to this strategy, questions become very, very easy, and you know how to structure them and develop them quite well. So if somebody asked me, do people respect the police? I would say, in my country, most people do respect the police. I would have to say that. The reason why they respect the police is because it's a very, very dangerous job. They put their life on the line, and they don't know if they're going to work that day, whether they'll come home to their loved ones, because there is quite a bit of crime where I live. So people do respect the fact that they might get killed or they might get injured. And people also respect the fact that they are keeping them safe from criminals. For example, there are quite a few drug dealers in the city that I live in. And the police regularly have to go into drug dealers' houses where they keep their drugs. And the drug dealers have weapons. They have knives. They have guns. So it is a very risky situation for the police to go into that area, to go into that house. And sometimes they do get stabbed or shot. There was one incident last week in our city where a policeman went into the house to try and catch a drug dealer, and the drug dealer had a very fierce dog, and the dog attacked him and mauled him, and caused a little bit of injury. So they do respect, people do respect the fact that they are trying to keep the streets clean from these people and keep drugs off the street. However, some people don't really respect the police because inevitably in every police force there is some corruption, and there have been some stories in the past where police have stolen money from criminals or tried to extract money from people by saying that they were going to arrest them. But this is a very these incidents are few and far between. So you can see what I've done there. I've answered the question, yes, people do respect the police. Then I've explained why, because it's a dangerous job and because they protect the public. Then I've given examples, and I just made those examples up. Where I live, there are no drug dealers. There's very little crime where I live. I just made that up, and it's totally acceptable to do that. Say whatever helps you answer the question. And then I showed the other side. Where I live, again, there is no corruption that I know of, but I know that happens, so I just added that in. Don't think of it as lying or misleading anybody. All you're doing is putting on a performance. If you think that's lying, then Leonardo DiCaprio is lying every time he, makes a new movie. It's not lying. You're just performing for the examiner. So, will you be able to use that question for every single type of question? No. So if they said to you, what are the advantages and disadvantages of being a policeman? You're not going to answer it in that way. But what you would do is you would mention an advantage, and then you would explain why you think that's an advantage, and then you would give an example of why you think that's an advantage, and then you would talk about the disadvantage, and then you would explain why you think that is a disadvantage and give an example. And in that situation, you wouldn't have to give a concession because you've already done that. If somebody said to you, do people respect policemen or policewomen more than lawyers or less than lawyers? You're going to explain whether you think it's policemen more than lawyers or lawyers more than police, and then you're going to explain why and give examples, and then you might say, however, in certain situations it's the opposite. All right, so don't overcomplicate this. Don't, if you have any questions about this, let me know. But don't say, in this question, should we do this? Or this question, should you do that? Just look at the basic overarching principles of this strategy. It's answering the question, explaining it, giving examples, showing the other side if possible. That's all you really need to do. You don't have to follow it exactly, but this is helping you, give a very well developed answer. So, preparation. Now that you know what the common problems are, you know how to overcome the common problems, you know the common questions, and you have a strategy to answer these properly, you need to prep it. So, get a partner to ask you questions and record your answers. So, this is probably the best way. Get your spouse, get your friend, get your next door neighbor, whoever it is, give them some questions. They can just Google it on their phone, part 3 questions, and get them to ask you these questions and record them. Do this by yourself by looking at a list of real questions and record yourself. If you can't find someone, do it yourself. I don't think the doing it yourself one works as well, because what happens is you inevitably look at the questions before you start answering them, and your subconscious starts to process that information, and it's not really like a real exam, because in the real exam you're going to get really difficult questions, and they're going to not shock you, but you're going to have to get into the the process of staying very calm and answering questions as best you can, even when you don't understand them. So that's how to deal with them. And start off slowly and think about the type of question and the grammar and functional language needed to answer it. So if you're not very confident at all about part 3, what I would do is I would have your notes, I would have the grammar, I would have all the information that you need in front of you. I would get the person to ask you a question, and before answering it, I would look at the grammar, think about the question, write the question down even, and really think deeply about it. Start off your preparation very, very slowly. And then what you can do is you can take away your notes, you can start answering them more quickly, and start answering them more naturally. But don't try to start off at 60 miles an hour. If you were learning how to drive, the instructor wouldn't take you onto the motorway and tell you to start driving at 100 miles an hour immediately. What they would do is they would start off very, very slowly in a car park or something. So do the same with IELTS, and everything with IELTS like that. So in the next module, we have finished modules 1, 2, and 3. And what we're going to do is we're going to start off with our vocabulary, grammar, all that stuff. So the next module is going to be just on vocabulary. Okay, hope that you enjoyed this module. Hope that it was useful, and I'll see you in the next one. And I'm very sorry that I, made a couple of mistakes, something wrong with my brain today. It's maybe too early in the morning and I need some coffee. But hopefully you understood everything, and I'll see you again. Bye-bye.